This episode of the Tactics Meeting is brought to you by Easy 213. Easily manage resource requests and approvals during an incident or exercise. The Easy 213 application is available for web browsers, iPad OS, iOS, and it's available on the desktop. Manage multiple incidents, unlimited resource requests, digital signature capture, alerts when a new order has been placed. I've used it for 3 exercises and people love it. For more information, go to portagebay.com/easy213. And we thank them and Portage Bay for their support of the Tactics Meeting. Now let's get to this amazing episode. It's time for the Tactics Meeting, the show where we talk to subject matter experts about response tactics and technology. And today, we've got a unique show. We've got a panel of experts to talk about virtual command posts. And I know what you're thinking. We've heard about virtual command posts enough. We've heard about them at Clean Pacific. We're going to hear about them at Clean Gulf. Everybody's talking about virtual command posts. But this is a group of people who've been running virtual command posts, and we're going to talk about what has gone well and what we think should be avoided. And we can all agree, I think, that virtual command posts, in one form or another, are here to stay. And with that, we'll kind of go around the room. Let me introduce our panel, starting with Jessica Whipple from Amergent Tech. It was your brainchild to put this together in the first place, right? So
it was.
You approached me. You're kind of our producer today, so welcome.
Honorary. And I'm really excited to be a part of it. Yeah, I have been kind of heading up a lot of the virtual exercise development for our company, and throughout the last few years, like you said, it's been prevalent, and everyone's kind of been forced to dip their toe into that pool of virtual command posts, whether it be fully virtual or hybrid. And the goal in kind of facilitating something like this is, if everyone's doing it, it makes sense that we all get together and share what we're learning for the betterment of the response community as a whole. So not gatekeeping anything, just opening the doors and talking about what works well, what doesn't well, and trying to move together as a whole community.
Yeah, maybe we could agree on some processes, so we'll start doing it all the same. And part of the planning has been Russ Beauchamp. Have I said that name correctly? Maybe pronounce it for me.
Russ Beauchamp, it's French.
Oui. Tell us a little about yourself, Russ. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. My name is Russ Beauchamp, Vice President of Services for Amergent Techs. And prior life, I was MST in the Coast Guard down in LA Long Beach, and really kicked off my response career. And over the last 18 years, we've created our company and seen what it is today during our drills and exercises, actual events, and looking forward to this podcast.
Great. Well, happy to have you. And from the regulatory side, we can't all be responders from the SMT guns for hire. From the regulatory side, we have Howard Zorzi from the Washington Department of Ecology, from the Drill Designs and Planning section. Howard, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Howard Zorzi, Department of Ecology. I'm a drill planner. So I'm on a team of 4, and we produce about 100 drill packets a year, around 28 plan holders. We do drills that are, deployment based, tabletop based, and I guess I've been in this position for about 7 years. Have worked with ecology since 2004. Had a prior Coast Guard run as well out of MSO Hampton Roads, kind of kicked off my career, and spent 5 years as an EPA contractor after that. So over the last 7 years, we've been building up the drill program, and COVID struck, and hence we had to work through that from an agency perspective as well. And that's why we're here now.
Yeah, I think my Wismic worst case tabletop was the first full virtual drill I did with you in ecology and your team, and you helped me design that, and I really appreciate it. And then, last but not least, we have Mark Curtis, Director of Emergency Response for Crowley Maritime and the president of the Washington State Maritime Cooperative's Board of Directors, which makes you kind of my boss, yeah, after a fashion. And you did the really great, almost all virtual Prince William Sound drill, which I'm excited to hear about. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Mark.
All right. So as you mentioned, I work for Crowley full-time. They're paying my bills. As the director, I have the pleasure of being preparedness instead of response, which means I focus a lot more of my energy and my time on training and setting things up like virtual incident command posts. We, since this pandemic kicked in, had to pivot pretty quickly to make sure that we are ready as a private industry company to respond to any kind of emergency that could come our way. For those that aren't familiar with Crowley, it is an international logistics and shipping company. We do everything from oil tankers to container ships, tug towing, offshore assist, and we've ventured into the wind market very recently with an entire branch dedicated to that. There's also warehousing, logistics, trucking, delivery of fuel to upper Alaska and gas stations in Alaska as well. So it's a very large company. I'm very fortunate. I'm focused on the Crowley shipping aspect, all the floating assets that we manage. So it's around 90 to 100 vessels, depending on which day of the week it is.
Well, that's a big organization, and you're hopefully going to help me with our ERTV exercise later in the summer. Fingers crossed. Howard, you'll probably be helping us with that as well. So let's start with Jessica to talk about setting up command posts. You know, in the early stages of COVID, when we all jumped into this, we were looking at a lot of platforms. And Jessica, you were responsible for setting up some command posts on the fly for a number of clients. What were the different platforms you looked at, and what did you decide worked best in the end?
Well, I think kind of in line with what a lot of other people have experienced, we kind of gave everything a shot in the beginning, and you do a little bit of road testing and you use kind of what everyone is open to. So we actually did our first exercise using Adobe Connect, and we ran into a few challenges just because of how the breakout rooms worked. Some positives, some pros, some cons, and ultimately we landed with Teams, which is where I think everyone is kind of settled on. Teams has a lot of the functionality, the documentation added in, and the ability for people to move between kind of those breakout rooms or those ICS functional areas on their own without needing any support from a moderator. So we've kind of landed on Teams, especially because of the customizability and a lot of the functionality that it offers.
Yeah, I think we all looked at Adobe Connect right in the beginning because the Coast Guard was using it, right? The Coast Guard's like, this is what we do. And it looked cool, right? Because you had the tiled little windows, and it's like, I could turn this into a situation display, and that would work pretty well. And then we found, well, it's not as great as we thought. From the regulatory side, Howard, how did this evolve for you?
Well, we were doing simple stuff as just using an iPhone in the field for some response, for some drills. We would have somebody, move a phone around and show us the deployment of a boom or a skimmer. And then for the tabletop side, we really started with different platforms. I think Zoom was one of them. I think Teams won out overall in time. I think that we received a lot of training through the various drills, and when we got pretty comfortable with Teams, it kind of stuck. They were able to manage and process documents, show the common operating picture, manage injects and communications pretty easily through that platform, I thought.
Mark, did you have an evolution of your command posts, or did you jump straight into Teams?
Timing was everything. About 4 months prior to the pandemic actually kicking off, the company made the decision to go all in with Microsoft Teams. And a lot of us went, oh no, not something new. We just figured out how to use SharePoint. We just figured out how to use this. And once the pandemic kicked in, we learned very quickly. There were a lot of, to everybody else's point, a lot of learning sessions. Our IT team did a great job of preparing us, but we just didn't know how we were going to use it. We were invited to other people's drills and exercises in the first couple months of the pandemic, and we could see different versions. And so my awesome planning section chief, Kelly Bachman, stole a bunch of ideas, and she built out the very first fully virtual incident command post for us. And ever since then, we've done it virtually. But to your point, this past May up in Valdez, we did hybrid, which everybody warned us don't do. It's the most painful version. But we walked away with a lot of new information and knowledge where we're always going to be hybrid. Period. It actually worked really well, and we got a lot of feedback. And most of the feedback was exactly what everybody's mentioned. You got to put people through training. As they get more and more used to Teams, there's so many intricacies with the cool modifications that we can make. I mean, during the May 2022 exercise, we even had a channel dedicated to the live drone coverage that was out over the water at the time. So that took a couple of times to get people comfortable with using Microsoft Teams. And then, of course, we've got the difficulties of some of the .mil email accounts, and we had workarounds, So, like I said, we've been very fortunate. We've done 3 large-scale exercises, one, hybrid, using Microsoft Teams, and we love it.
To that point, Mark, and sorry to jump in over you, Dan, but I actually think hybrid, while it brings its own challenges, that is the most realistic of what you'll probably see in the future. So it bears, it's worth talking about, because full virtual has its own setup, fully in person has its own setup, but hybrid is actually probably what we'll see in responses going forward. So it's good to practice that, I think.
I agree completely. Russ, what's your thought?
My thought is we've always kind of been hybrid before. There's always been people on the phone or conference calls being held someplace else, and now we just have a platform to bring it all together. And I love the video aspect of it that we're doing now. Howard mentioned somebody with a cell phone out in the field putting boom out, and we were able to see that now real time. And just thinking over the evolution of the last 3 years, what everybody's talking about, I just really realized how far we've come in the last 3 years. We had a huge training aspect of it, year one, where everybody was trying to learn how to use Zoom or Teams. And now pretty much everybody's proficient at it, and it makes everything flow much smoother. And even if you're not there, you're even on a plane, you can still participate in an incident command post these days.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, pretty soon we're going to have to stop calling it hybrid and just accept that this is how we do it now, right? It's not a question any longer. And people just need to come prepared to do that. And Howard's we're meeting on Friday to plan another planning meeting for my drill, my Washington State Maritime Cooperative exercise at the end of April. And it will have remote participants. But not only will it have remote participants, but we'll be sharing a command post with the Canadians. We're going to be sharing common resource tracking between WSMC and Western Canada Marine Response Corporation, WCMRC. We're going to do a single common operating picture. Our GIS operator is going to log into their Esri account. It'll be one mapping system. We're going to do a merged resource ordering process, and it's going to be great. There's a little teaser for you, Howard, for our meeting on Friday. And one of the things that I have been stressing to people getting ready for this drill is that even if you're going to be present in person in the command post, you must bring your laptop, you must bring a set of headphones, because all of the meetings, if even one person is not present, the meeting will be on Teams, and you'll have to join in that meeting in a way that you're blocking out the sound of other people. All of our files are going to be in Teams. Even though we'll have a documentation unit leader in the room, she's going to be putting all the documents in the documentation unit channel. And so there's the process, in my view, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts, is that there should be no difference in how we do things, whether you walk into a physical command post or not. We should be teaching, training, practicing all of the same things. So there's my thought. And with that, Jessica, you had some thoughts on how we deal with this documentation piece within Teams, which I think is really the big piece that we as a response community, plan holders, regulators, SMT providers, need to agree upon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's kind of the biggest lessons learned over the last 3 years have been mostly centered around documentation. I mean, you can tell from talking to different organizations who have been doing virtual exercises. There are a lot of people, Mark, you mentioned stealing. I don't know that I would use that word, but you are using the same ideas, coming to the same conclusions, whether it be by being exposed to it or participating in a drill or response and seeing what everyone else is doing and saying that is clearly the best way to move forward. Or I think it's fascinating because I think a lot of people have arrived to the same processes and conclusions independently. I've sat down with other people and they say, well, this is the process I use. And you realize that that's what you're using, but maybe you didn't learn it from them. You just arrived at the same conclusion because it is de facto the easiest or best way to do it. So the challenges that remain largely center around, I would say, documentation and situation. I think those are probably the two biggest, not unknowns, but kind of gray areas about whether there is a definitive best way to do something. I would say that one reason why we all love ICS is because it's scalable and modular and flexible, and you can activate and deactivate and scale it to do what you want. And that process applies to documentation and situation in a virtual command post, I think. There are a variety of ways to get the job done. So I think that the best thing to do in those areas is to make sure that you have a situation unit leader and a documentation unit leader that are comfortable with the virtual technology, and making sure that they have an agreed upon process that they have discussed with Unified Command so that they can put out a process or policy and publish it to the organization. Here's how we're going to do it for this response. I think a lot of that depends on the size and scale. So you can kind of tailor it to what you need, but having someone who is capable of determining, performing an assessment and determining, do we need the process to be this complex? Do we need a more simple process? And then sitting down with Unified Command and agreeing on that decision. Do we want to have a larger documentation unit that has multiple personnel who are solely tasked with making sure all the virtual documentation is in order? Do we want to have a situation unit board that is displayed with a rotating PowerPoint slide with links to the source documents? Or are we going to pin everything as tabs up across the top? I think there are a few different ways to do it. So I would say that the best practice is to agree, for that incident on how you want to run that process for your organization.
Mark, in your drill for Prince William Sound, what did you land upon for documentation kind of support?
We are very fortunate. Our document unit leader, or our DOCL, had done it multiple times in the past in the virtual environment. So when she set it up, the big thing is to have people work in their own channels. You keep your documentation, but when you go to the document table, essentially, or that document channel, and you click into it, the file folders are large. So it's submitting, approved. It's right at the top of the screen. So there wasn't any confusion as to what was the status of the document. If it's over on the submitted phase, that's awesome. That means it's not ready yet. And then the final ones would move to the opposite side and eventually be loaded up into the software that we had been using in order to create the overall web IAP printout. But the setup was very, very basic, and that's how we should go. Just hey, this is the largest folder, so physically make it the largest icon on the screen. Submit your finished plan here. Let DOCL take a look at it, because they have to vet it. They have to make sure that all of the things that they look at are there before it can go to a unified command. But then once it's gone through the unified command, put it in this folder over here. So it's not like a lot of movement. It's just either this folder or that folder. But it's all you really can see when you open up their page.
Howard,
there are lots of other subfolders.
Okay. Howard, what have you seen? You've seen a lot of these drills now since you help design and evaluate many plan holders, exercises. What have you seen that's gone well in documentation, and have you seen some big crash and burns?
Well, let me just start. We've had 2 worst case drills this year so far. In both of them, we did have positive hits for COVID. So starting with the fact that COVID's still part of our processes, we have to look at our staffing, make sure we're adding masks and we're adding test kits to our Go kit. So it's still real. And so we're still looking 2 platforms and hybrid drills. And so it is still here to stay. I'll say that we see the same types of things you're talking about, but slightly different from plan holder to plan holder. So there is a learning aspect to it. I think there's people that arrive at the exercise or incident that haven't been in on training or aren't familiar with it, and those folks will need to be brought along. And the glory of an incident is you have multiple days. So you're going to have time to work these things out. In an exercise, we have one to 1.5 days to work it out. We had a drill at the end of last year that really relied heavily on the Wi-Fi, the Teams process. The common operating picture was completely on Teams. There was no display. All the documentation was managed through Teams. And so when the internet went down, everything kind of came to a halt. And so you can just imagine in a real incident, you're probably going to have to prepare to go, old school paperwork in times where maybe internet's down or you have a software glitch or something of that nature. But in the end, it's going to take a lot more technician type work, people who are familiar with the systems, keeping them up and running. You're in the right command post location to manage those Teams platforms. And then you need to educate the people on how to use them. And since it is a slightly different, I think, from plan holder to plan holder, that's important information. Almost could use an in-briefing when you come to a real incident to see how they're managing the command post. We did a real incident late last year that we did use Teams. All the meetings were done on Teams. People could chime in from anywhere. So it was really neat. It was very inclusive. And we did have issues between the federal government and the state government, the platforms access to and fro. We had to actually feed them information from our computers because I believe their firewalls wouldn't allow them to access the Teams we were using. So I think there's just little issues to work out as we move forward, but I've seen the full spectrum. I've seen it work really well and gosh, really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, you make a really good point about the internet. You really, at this point, one source of internet is 0, 2 is 1, and 3 is 2. For the drill that I'm doing on April 26th in Port Angeles, we will have 3 sources of internet. The building has its own internet. Marine Spill Response Corporation is bringing in their satellite internet package, so they'll come in and set up the primary internet. They will have Starlink set up as a backup internet with automatic failover, and then third and last will be the building's internet. And if we can't survive with that, well, then we've got a really big problem. But people tell me, have told me for years in drills, oh, the internet's great. Internet's great. We've tested the internet. It's fine. It's fast. When anybody tells me that, I know it's the first thing that's going to fail. And it's inevitable. Just inevitable. And so, we're sparing no expense in the planning to make sure, especially since we're going to be working with the Canadians, and the internet is going to be so important, that there is really, outside of Cascadia, there is no chance that we are not going to have internet for this event. Russ, what are your thoughts?
We've had some valuable lessons about internet. And Howard touched on a good topic just a second ago, too, that I want to bring up. It's just the training aspect of it. And everybody sets up their virtual command posts differently. And we have to remember every client that we go to, that we've got different organizations and different agencies, different OSROs coming, that have all seen various versions of even Microsoft Teams, if we're doing a virtual command post on Microsoft Teams. So I think that the check-in and the brief is just really, really important. And doing a full tech check, including the Wi-Fi, prior to getting to a hotel, prior to getting in a client's office, has been really, really valuable. And we've learned some huge lessons. I agree. You need multiple sources of internet. And we were up at CRC up in Portland a couple weeks ago. I think they've got 3 or 4 different methods of getting internet into their building. We've got some clients that we realized very early on that there wasn't enough bandwidth for 140 people bringing computers, and through their company pipeline going out to New Jersey, there wasn't even going to be enough bandwidth even if we tried, and so they ended up having to get guest Wi-Fi coming on into their system and really bumping it up, making it robust. So lots of lessons learned in Wi-Fi and communication, and just the thinking about how much we stream. It is really huge. The amount of data we transfer at an exercise is huge.
Plus, Russ, our team always travels with hotspots. So whenever we travel to an exercise, that's always another contingency for Wi-Fi. We all have hotspots that fit up to 32 devices. And there have been times when the building Wi-Fi went out and we took each of our hotspots and gave it to a different table and said, this is your hotspot now. This is going to be your internet. Here's one for planning. Here's one for ops. Here's one for the JIC. Here's one for UC. And they all have now their own personal login for secure Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Sure. And prepared to do that. And even if you switch over Wi-Fi, we've got to remember to switch over all the computers. We've got to switch over all the printers. And it's a process. It's not just simply, we're going to go from the hotel Wi-Fi to now hotspots. We have to switch over everything, reconfigure everything. And it takes a team of people to do that. During an exercise, we've got limited time. And so we don't want to spend our time switching hotspots and Wi-Fi. We really want to concentrate on the process and getting our deliverables done.
Yeah, somebody had mentioned, I don't remember who, that you really have to staff a technician to be, was that you, Howard? Really have to staff a technician to be available to do that. And there are some other positions, I think, that aren't in the org chart that now need to be staffed when we're doing this kind of work. One of the things I've staffed that has been relatively successful is a help desk. Somebody we create a help channel in Teams so that if you're already in Teams, you can go there and ask for help. But it has an email address and it has a phone number. So much of the time, people need help in that first hour of the exercise. How do I can't log in, I can't, and we have to think ahead of time and staff someone that's dedicated to filling that role. And if it's a big exercise, it may have to be a couple of someones to fill that role. Yeah. Mark, have you had to, you had a lot of people online. How did you deal with the help desk issue, or did you?
We did, but we anticipated a lot of it. So for reference, the drill, I think our end number was 560 people who were either the normal amount in the VOC in Valdez would have been around 150 total per day. Everybody else was on our virtual incident command post on Teams, and so a couple things happened. So a lot of really good lessons learned. First thing, we show up, and up there, just like in the state of Washington, somebody else has the first couple hours. And so when we did the drill planning, Alyeska Serves was going to take day one, and we'd do a handover on day two, build up the unified command, just going through the normal motions. Well, our satellite team that was going to Valdez was only 25 people. They arrive, we say, oh, just come over to the VOC. I know it's day one. It's not realistic that you would be here this quick. Come on over, set up your computers, just get yourself acquainted, meet your counterparts from Serves. And the first thing that happened is everybody from that team couldn't access our own Microsoft Teams. Now, Serves was on our Microsoft Teams. Everybody else at home was on Microsoft. It was this 25 people who, there was a security component with the Wi-Fi in the VOC. And so we had to hotshot not a server, but a connector from our Anchorage office down to Valdez that night, so that when we were ready to take over in the morning, all of our teams would be on a Crowley server inside the VOC. So that's one of those things where if we didn't have a list of people in IT, because we have to talk to IT security to find out what happened. We have to talk to IT hardware to get equipment. We have to get an IT. But one of the things that you mentioned was that help desk. And their hashtag, if you really wanted to get a hold of them, everybody had their own hashtag depending on their role. They were help. So if anybody had typed into the chat in their channel help, it would signal to the person watching, waiting to assist, if they got the hashtag help call out. But it was its own channel as well, and he was based in Seattle and spent a lot of time just waiting for people to come to him or for one of us in the room to send the questions towards the help channel. So
like
yeah, we plan for failure.
I like the tag help. We've used tech support, but help is much more entertaining.
I know. I just made a note. I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it.
Because if you're in a position where you need help, you might as well laugh about it. I like it.
Right. Set up a flare. That's it. Well, the not being able to get in. Here's a situation that's happened to me twice, with two different clients that I was helping with their drill. Everything's working great. Right, we've got the team set up, we've tested it, we've invited everybody, and then the day before you go to log in and you can't log in, and you're like, what is going on here, right? And none of the guests can log in. And in the first time it happened, we literally had to go from the plan holder's Teams account to a third-party Teams account and set the whole thing back up again on the fly in the evening the day before the drill. And it took us like 3 months after the fact to figure out what had gone wrong. And then the second time it happened, I'm like, I've seen this before, right? It's all working great, and we were all logged in, and we've done training on it, and the guests have been in it, and then you can't get in. I'm like, take me down to your IT people. So we walk down the hall, we find IT. It's like, did you guys run updates? in the last couple of days. It's like, oh yeah, we ran updates over Saturday. Okay, it's completely broken, right? It's going to take you guys 3 weeks to fix it's the authentication, right? It's that Azure authentication that you need to get into Teams, and they run these updates, and now it's broken. And so one of the things that I like to tell people is you got to get IT on board, and you cannot run updates within 2 weeks of the exercise. Keep your fingers off the servers. I'm going to tape your hands to the desk. But it literally took us like 3 months to figure out, going to Microsoft, going to help, trying to figure out why this had happened and getting it fixed. And that was the problem. And
in that last minute setup moment, Dan, I'm sure you guys probably had this, but I would identify this as a best practice, is having a documented process for how to stand up your command post and having it detailed with very, very simple instructions for each item. First, you create the team. Here's how you name the team. Here's the settings you need to apply to the team. Here's the list of channels that you need to activate. Here's how you set up your tags. And here's, whatever Power Automate process you want to use, or whatever forms you want to pre-build into your file section. I think having that whole process broken out can help you in that last minute contingency. I mean, if that happened in the middle of an exercise, having that list and saying, all right, we got to start from scratch. Can I do it in 30 minutes or less? I'm just going to follow this check sheet.
I'll even do you one better. We have a mandate now in our policy to always have a team site ready. That's hidden. Nobody's on it except for my department. And God forbid something happens, we can just activate it, and one person will be assigned to adding people to it, and just doing it out. The one thing to remember, though, is with working with external people, once say it's your SMT or one of the state agencies, it's gonna, you got to turn it off and turn it back on again on their end once they've been added to the teams. And it's the number one failure that we saw the whole first 24 hours of our exercise is external people. They were invited in, they push the button, and then they can't see anything. It takes the system a little bit, but if you turn off your entire computer and turn it back on, which is the classic IT phrase, it works. And
either that or
like
force quitting Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, it was our mantra, have you turned off your computer and turned it back on again? I turned it off. What did you turn off? Oh, I closed the program. No. Just do what you're told.
That is one of our most simple and effective IT solutions for Microsoft Teams, is because it's a persistent application that's always running in the background. If you hit the X and close the window, it's still running. You have to right click on the icon and actually hit not close, to actually force quit, or do your Control Alt Delete Task Manager, because it's meant to keep giving you notifications in the background. When you hit the X, it's still running.
I don't know how many of you are in my situation where you have multiple Teams accounts, right? I have my Gallagher account, I have my Wismic account, I have my personal account, I have all these accounts, and I run a Mac. Anybody run a Mac? Raise your hand if you're Mac people. Maybe you're lucky in this regard. I cannot switch accounts without going under the hood and deleting the cache that Teams creates, because that cache is persistent, and it will, no matter how many times I select another account from the drop-down, it will launch me back into whatever account was running in the first place, because it looks at all of those cached parameters. So I have to go into my keychain, search for Teams, delete all the caches every single time I switch accounts. Not if I switch an account that's a guest account to the primary account, that's fine. But if I go from a Marine Exchange account to a Wismic account, I got to delete all the caches.
I hate to break it to you, Dan, but you're giving ammo to all the Windows users who say Macs don't integrate with Windows.
I may well be. But if anybody out there has got a Mac and you're having trouble switching accounts, launch your keychain,
That's a
type
good
in
tip.
Teams into the search, delete everything that comes up. You're like, oh, I can't delete that. Yes, you can. Teams will recreate it as soon as you launch Teams again, and you'll be fine until you have to do it again.
That's a good tip.
So, the other issue that I have had, and I'd be interested in everybody's solution to this, is document approvals. I mean, Mark has already talked about how we drop the documents into a folder for approval, but some of these documents actually need a signature. And in a lot of the drills that I did during the early stages of the pandemic, we would just say, oh, yeah, we'll just give me a thumbs up and I'll just type your name on the document and then type it approved. And we get by with that, I guess, in a drill. And if the regulators are willing to go, yeah, we'll accept that for this round, then you go along without actually solving the problem. But we need to actually get signatures from the unified command. And so this last round I was pulled in to do planning section chief work for the Speranza Marie salvage down on Santa Cruz Island. And we ended up having the responsible party using their DocuSign account send out the documents for signature. So I would build an IP, and then I would PDF the whole thing, and I would send it to the party at the office of the responsible party, and they would package it up, send it out for signature, get it back, and stick it back into the folder when it was actually approved. And it was a bit of a pain and wouldn't work well in a larger command post to have to send it out in that way. So who's done what and what's worked well? Mark, what'd you do?
This is where hybrid comes in. We were having plans submitted from all over North America. Right now I'm standing in Jacksonville, Florida. Our command post was located in Valdez, Alaska. I've got office in Seattle. And so we had resources, just working on plans around everywhere. And they would go to that one giant inbox that I was talking about. But then we would have them printed out, brought up to the unified command, and did physical signatures. We didn't have anybody on the unified command not there. So we would need to come up with a solution because I think somebody said they had a state on scene coordinator who was virtual. That would be how do we get a DocuSign on something that's been physically signed? Yeah, print it out, PDF it again, send it over to them electronically, then put it into the finish folder. So it does get complicated, but we were very fortunate. We had the entire unified command in person. Even though our DOCL was in Jacksonville. So,
Howard, you said you had a drill recently where the SOSC was remote. Did the responsible party address signatures for approval?
Yeah, it came up. I would say that a workaround had to be worked. I think kind of mentioned the concept of a DocuSign or an electronic signature. But it definitely was an issue in the early morning hours, and people were chatting about how to do that. And I know they just went with verbal initially, but even in real incidents where maybe even the unified command spread out, it's been hard to get actual signatures. I'm not sure if we're internally are there yet, but something like a DocuSign or electric signature app or something is going to have to be worked into real responses, and it comes up in exercises. I don't know that it's been a best practice has been finalized or anything of that nature, but it's something that would get worked out over days, I think, probably.
Yeah, I think by day 2 or day 3 you'd figure it out, but it'd be nice to be done day 1. Jessica, Russ, you've got a lot of clients you've worked with in this regard. Have you landed on something?
We actually started using Adobe Sign just within our own system, but the Adobe accounts that we have allow for e-signatures. The key is for that is actually finding who has what type of account, whether it's a DocuSign account or an Adobe account. Does the documentation unit leader have access to that account, or can we add them real quickly to our accounts, or who actually needs to get access to start setting those plans up? Adobe is what we've used. I know that other people use DocuSign, and I'm pretty sure one of the last updates to Word, I've actually seen ask for a signature within Word now too. So I don't. Yeah, and I just saw it within the last week or so. Hadn't played with it too much, but if it's another Microsoft product, if it will co-play or be integrated in with Teams, that may be another option too. And that's just within the last week or so that I've seen that. So that could be an option moving forward, since how most of us have Microsoft accounts already if we're on Teams.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a. I mean, I haven't searched in the last few months, but I'm surprised that Microsoft hasn't built something directly into Teams in this regard. But I haven't seen it. I know there are plugins that allow you to kind of integrate DocuSign or integrate Adobe Connect or integrate these other accounts, but nothing that replaces having one of those external accounts for doing it.
Kind of. Microsoft integrated into Teams. Microsoft has a function called approvals. And approvals, you can send stuff out for signature straight from Microsoft. The only kind of hiccup to that, which we have run into in the past, I don't know if they've remedied this yet, but being able to sign that document requires that the recipient have some form of Microsoft license. So while DocuSign and Adobe Sign, you can send something out using that system, and only the sender needs to have the license, and anyone else can click on it and sign the document. With Microsoft approvals, it's actually a really cool program, but you can't, at least historically, you couldn't open it and sign off on something unless you had a Microsoft license. It did not have to be the same tenant as the sender. So, if I'm sending something from our Microsoft tenant to a client's Microsoft tenant, they can open it and sign it. But if you've got, a member of the Unified Command who doesn't have a Microsoft license, then that becomes a challenge to getting it signed off on by them. And Microsoft may have remedied that recently, because they've been going through, as we know, very, very frequent updates. But they do have that signatory built in that is integrated into Teams. Just maybe need to double check and see if it's going to work for your organization.
I'll have to turn my documentation unit leader loose on that before the drill, because Howard's going to ask me on Friday how I'm going to do it. I'd like to be able to answer that question.
Yeah, look into approvals, and I think what they do is it will send it in Teams, and if they happen to have Teams open, they can click to sign it. If they're not in Teams, it also emails it to them. So it takes whatever email address is on file and emails it to them. They can look at the document and hit I approve. And then all of that, of course, has like an audit log that's built into the approvals process.
Oh, neat. Okay. Well, another process that we've used a bunch of different hacks for, I guess hack would be the right term in this case, in this hybrid environment, is the resource ordering process. How we've done the ICS 213 RR. And shout out to Matthew Collada at Transmontane. He did a great job of putting together an Excel workbook that had a control worksheet on it that then linked to various sheets of the workbook, and each sheet was a new 213RR, and it actually worked pretty well. But I'd be interested in what other people have experienced, and I'll start with Jessica. What have you and your clients done to solve this problem?
Well, I'm happy that you've already given credit where credit is due to Matthew, because in the early days of the pandemic, he sat down with Russ and I, and we were talking about the virtual command post, and he showed us what he had come up with. Howard, I believe you've seen our spreadsheet for the 213 RRs in a drill we did last year, and ours was built on that framework. So we learned from Matthew. I'm sure his has grown and changed and kind of been refined since then. And ours started in a similar place as his, and then we kind of took it to where we needed it to go. It has gotten positive reviews. It's requires training, as any new system does. It's a new process, and one of the big things about taking everything from the way we used to do it to the way we're doing it now in a virtual environment is not only does someone need to be trained on the ICS process, but now they also need to be trained on how to execute that virtually. So now they almost need double training. But we've got a spreadsheet, and just like Matthew's, it's got that kind of the status page on the front, which gives you an at a glance view of the list of resources, and it has a routing status bar on the side that's color coded. So it'll show you as soon as there is a signature in the signature box for the key people involved in the routing process, that little box turns green. So if you are a part of that routing process, you can just open up that document, look on page 1, look down your column, and see if there's anything that is waiting for you to move it forward. So in training, we just tell people, consider it an inbox, check it every 30, 45 minutes, an hour if you're busy, go in there, see if anything's hung up waiting for you. And they can click on it. It takes them straight to the page. And it's been a good system. I don't know if you've got any other comments on it, Russ.
What I really like about the electronic system versus paper and the old color-coded ICS 213 RRs that we used to have is you can see everything at a glance in the electronic system, and what's where, what's being held up by resource unit leader or logistics or what finance can actually see. And so that's a really cool part about using the electronic system that we have is you can go into it and see exactly where everything is. It really helps the resource unit leader out, especially during large events when a lot of stuff is coming in, and that they can just easily sit at their computer and start bringing up one by one, as opposed to going through sheets of paper and trying to understand what somebody's writing, or did they push hard enough on the carbon copy and everything else. So we've enjoyed the process, and yeah, thanks to Matthew for talking to us at the beginning of it all.
Yeah, and he actually then went out and looked around for somebody to write to turn that idea into an app, and we've done that now. We've created a company, one of my sponsors actually, Portage Bay Solutions, created as a display program for Clean Pacific last year the Easy 213 application based in the FileMaker framework. And so using that same idea that Matthew created, we created the dashboard. We can assign positions, section chiefs, approvers, resource unit leaders, and we built in the entire world database. So if you're trying to order something, you just pull it right in. And this, Matthew moved from the spreadsheet. We used it at his Martinez drill, his Richmond drill, his Portland drill last year. And Howard, I'm going to use it in April for resource ordering. And it's as the name implies, it's pretty easy. It requires that you log into yet another app, but it's very quick to add a person. It emails them a link, and they just jump right into it, and they're in it in a web browser. And I've embedded it in Teams in a tab in a web viewer, and that's one of the really great things about the additional versatility of Teams. We talk about how do we share the common operating picture, how do we share these other things. Well, we simply use the built-in web viewer tool and stick a link in there, and we're off to the races. So Easy 213, a new solution in the easy suite of tools. Mark, what did you guys use?
I like the idea of easy.
Easy. Easy's always good, right? I want it to be as easy as possible.
We use TRG. TRG is phenomenal across the board, and so when we're dealing with an organization such as Serves in Alyeska, they also use it. So as they are preloaded. All the information is already there for them. So we were going to exist in their environment, which made our drill a little weirder because they were in our team's environment and we were in their TRG environment. So in the future, hoping everything can be in one environment, that would be awesome. But we've been a customer of TRG for a while.
Yeah, there's a number of members that WSMC has where we wouldn't use one of the Easy 213 or something. We like if it's a Crowley event, we're going to go straight into Crowley's IAP account. If it's a Polar Tankers event, we're going right into the IAP process with TRG. But if they're not a TRG, WSMC isn't a TRG member, so we have to have another way of doing it for these smaller fishing vessels, container ships, people who aren't prepared to go into that full-on environment. Howard, what are your thoughts? What have you seen that work? You must have seen dozens of people do it dozens of ways over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're honing in on a lot of the right things here. I think there's layers now because you have IAP software, you've got teams, you've got paperwork. Again, I just can't stress enough the training ahead of time, a tech check, handouts, IT support, things of that nature you've been honing in on because somebody may be very well versed in IAP software but not really know what they're doing in teams or vice versa. And you have to know how they're being used. It has to be pretty clear. You don't want a section start populating an IAP, a portion of IAP, when you're displaying it through the Teams process. So I think there's some clarity that needs to be brought into a response or an exercise around how you're doing stuff. So we usually through the drill design process, we're pretty clear. We're looking for good tools to communicate that to the staff. Even if they weren't there for the in-brief or the training, they might be able to get a handout or a player's guide or something of that nature to let them know exactly how to sign in and process the different platforms.
Excellent. So I guess that brings us to the idea of really integrating these third-party software platforms into teams. We've got these other things that are going on. Jessica, do you have an example of some other process you've tried to bring into the team's environment and make it available to people?
Yeah, I think both in our Adobe Connect exercise and a few of our Teams exercises, we do have clients who use the IAP software. So that has been part of our planning process and part of our training process is how do you effectively use both programs at the same time? And how do you make sure that if you are kind of participating in the Teams environment, that you're able to properly display what's happening in IAP? And a lot of that is really important because often the RP is the person who has the IAP account, and some of the agencies, may or may not be able to get in there, especially for a driller exercise. So you've got to troubleshoot access to that, and maybe you've got observers or evaluators, especially in an exercise, who want to see what's going on. So training people on making sure that they always have a video call available in their channel or in their kind of table group for their ICS function, and have someone sharing their screen, have someone on camera, so that if anyone needs to know what you're working on or needs to ask questions about what you're doing in the IAP software for your section, that they can get a hold of you. So if they can't see it, they're not going to know what's going on. So just kind of keeping those open lines of communication. And then I would definitely say if you're integrating multiple software processes, it becomes even more necessary that you have a second monitor.
That is a really good point. when we talk about what is required for hardware when we're trying to integrate these processes, I have gotten in the habit now in my small command post Pelican box that I carry around. I've got a little flat screen 17-inch monitor that'll power off a USB uh, cable, and it works great. I mean, it's actually bigger, slightly larger than my laptop's monitor. So I get two monitors, and for the Mac users who have an iPad, there's just a button for that, and you can turn your iPad into a second monitor just like that. So an advantage over Windows. I must
Trying to
say.
redeem your Mac,
I
huh?
do what I can. I do what I can.
Are we going to tell him about the Microsoft Surface, or are we not going to share that with him?
Oh well.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Will the Surface do a sidekick thing?
Oh yeah.
My Surface actually detaches into a tablet with a separate keyboard,
Mine
just like
too.
the iPad Pro
But
does.
can you make it? Can you make it a second monitor for the Windows laptop?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
that's-
no.
Yeah.
Well, mine
Well,
is a Windows laptop,
Well, I
and
know,
I
but
just plug another monitor into it. I have a
All right,
portable
right.
monitor like you do.
yeah, those portable monitors are really great, and they're so cheap now. You know, you can get a 15-inch one, which I think is actually too small, but you can get the 15-inch one for like $120.
I would say that's a critical part of a Go kit these days.
So, an external monitor, uh, backup battery for your phone, right? You got to have backup battery that's charged, right? Charge that thing ahead of time. Headphones and a microphone are now part of the kit. What else? Headphone, microphone, backup power supply, dual monitors. Anything else? A dongle.
Dongles for sure. A dongle for everything.
All of them. All the dongles.
VGI, HDMI, USB-C, USB. It's a must because you never know when you're walking in to either a hotel or a command post, and you don't know what to even plug into in the TV these days. So you've got to have all of them ready to roll.
That's a really good point.
We even throw in a power cord in case they can't reach a power outlet.
Yes, I have an extension cord in my kit as well.
We
And
always tell
fortunately,
people
my
that-
latest laptop has its own HDMI port. Windows or Mac finally got rid of just the USB-Cs, and with the 14 and 16-inch laptops, you get a dedicated HDMI port, and thank the Lord.
Yep. So we've we actually carry 12-foot HDMI cords as well, and splitter. And so we can now hit our single HDMI with several different projectors going around the incident command post. If we're talking hardware wise, one of the challenges that we have had over the last 3 years is the actual AV and PA speaker system hybrided together. When we're all in the same room, we've got one speaker system with one microphone. And trying to incorporate Teams so we could broadcast without setting up a whole production in and of its own, without bringing even more camera equipment. One of the challenges that we have is to incorporate the physical meeting into the virtual space without spending thousands of dollars on tech gear every time we go to a different hotel or even a warehouse for a command post. So sometimes we got speakers set up next to another microphone, and then we can't hear the people asking questions via Teams virtually, and so that's a problem that we have had that we're still looking for a solution for. And if we've got it, and pretty much everybody else I think has it, or maybe they've come up with a solution, and I'd really like to talk to them.
Russ, I think that you're forgetting our solution. We have actually started using, well, not just started, but we have a couple of meeting owls. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar. There's a couple different, brands and companies that make similar systems, but we have found success great success with using that meeting owl to make people who are participating virtually feel like they're in the room. So it has a 360-degree camera, 18 multi-directional microphones. You pop that thing on a tripod in the middle of the room, and then if you the challenge comes with placing it properly so that it doesn't cause any feedback with an in-person PA system. But if you place that properly, then you've got your PA system in person. The owl is picking everything up online. And because it also has the speakers on it, then anyone who's remote, if they ask a question through a Teams call, it comes out that speaker on the mic. So you do get a pretty good integration. But I would say that does require having the right IT setup and placement and spacing in the room, having someone to monitor that owl and having it connected to your Teams call properly so that it can see the speakers in the room. So we have had success with that.
Howard?
I was going to second that. I think it's important to be inclusive of the people that are remote. A lot of times, they're seeing a screen that's blank. There's no people there. There's a conversation going on, or there's work being done. But remote people, you really just want to be inclusive. And I think these 360 cameras help a lot if they're having a meeting, and they'll zoom right into the person that's talking. And there's other etiquette that we've learned, from raising your hand in a meeting, and somebody to monitor those chats when somebody does have a question and all that. But I would second that. Those cameras, when I've seen those used, have worked really well. I've even seen meetings streamed out into the command post, so people who were interested in what was going on in the meeting could actually watch, not necessarily participate, but watch.
Yeah, and those owls, they have a tripod, a camera tripod thread on the bottom of them, so you can use a tripod. I've successfully used one in a parking lot for a briefing. It was a U.S. Oil exercise a year or so ago, and we had a staging area set up with MSRC's satellite internet, and we put the meeting owl up on a tripod, and it was crystal clear to hear, even in the open air, 30, 40 feet away. Worked great. And Howard, for the WSMC drill, there will be 2 of them in the room. 2. I have 2. So they're great. But that brings us also to that position you're talking about, which is really a meeting coordinator, right? You have to have somebody that is going to start the meeting, who's going to send out any links that are necessary if people aren't actually logged into Teams, that are going to send out the meeting announcement, make sure that the camera and stuff are set up. They're part of the planning section, and they should that's their whole job, is to start and stop and coordinate meetings, and during the meeting to monitor the chat. And I don't know what else to call them other than meeting coordinator,
or a facilitator, yeah,
meeting
something
facilitator.
like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that person also needs to know where the files are that need to be displayed, and how to share the screen, and then how to connect that laptop to it, especially if you're doing, again, in person and virtual. Whoever is facilitating that meeting needs to be able to display to a projector screen for people in person and to the Teams window for people online, so everyone's looking at the same information.
Yeah. Go ahead,
that person is a producer. I will not take any title short of producer for that. They are magicians. When they do it well, they are magicians. And one way that we solve the announcements, so anything that's a 213 general message or a critical announcement, that in Microsoft Teams, when you go to put a new message out, you can do it as an announcement by toggling around. When you first go in, you're like, hey, I'm going to start a new conversation. Then you say, hey, this isn't just a conversation. This is an announcement, and it's got the big banner, and you get other ways of getting everybody's attention, and you can direct it to as many of the rooms as you want. So say we get to end of gameplay, end of day, whatever you're going to call it, we would send it to every single channel at the same time to get everybody that's either virtual or sitting there with their laptop open, get a flash saying, read this, and it would say, okay, we've shut down for the day. We only picked up that microphone, I'd say, for the safety briefing at the beginning of each day, and just to close out and thank everybody's participation.
Yes, those are really good points. A phrase that I picked up along the way in the beginning of the pandemic when we started doing this is digital first. We have to focus on the people who are remote. People tend to focus on the people who are sitting around the table in front of them. But that is not what we can do. It has to, whether it's a command post or a seminar that we're doing or whatever it is, our focus has to be to make sure that our remote participants are getting the same experience or a superior experience to the people who are there in the room. And it requires that we set up to do our briefings a little differently. I've got now a 201 slide deck, a situation briefing slide deck, and so you can't just pass out a 201 to people in the room and hope that you're getting the briefing across. You have to set up a slide deck and project that for everyone who's participating. And this, it's not all that common, but I think it's critical. So digital first should be our mantra as we go into these drills and responses.
Yeah, another thing that we advise people to do in training is to designate a in-person point of contact for the virtual points of contact for each section. So within planning section, or maybe it's down to the unit level, make sure that within environmental unit, if you've got 2 remote participants, that one person who's in the room is tasked with keeping in contact with those people. That way it's not just, hey, it's all of our jobs, so we all need to do it, but hold one person accountable. Make sure you're talking to those 2 people throughout the day. Make sure you're getting the communication to flow both ways. So putting the onus on someone to ensure that that's happening.
Yeah, I think somebody mentioned, it might have been you, Jessica, that said, when you're going into that channel, it should be somebody should be there to answer that. In some cases, I think it was Agneta Dahl at NJ Resources who kind of started referring to those channels not as channels but as tables. Think of yourself when you jump into that channel as walking up to the situation table in the physical command post, and someone should be there to greet you. So if you're leaving for a meeting, you need to have somebody in that channel with their camera and microphone on who is ready to greet whoever happens to jump in there. I think that the channels are staffed, that the unit is staffed at all times. I think that's a critical component of digital first environment.
And I going in that direction as well too. Linking your phone if you're leaving for a meeting, link your phone with your Teams account, and so you're still getting messages. You can still communicate, especially if you're a planning section chief and you're going to be in meetings all day. You can still monitor what's going on, and not even being at the table, which is really good with the virtual aspect these days.
Yeah, and or even just join a meeting on the phone. We did a response in Seattle a number of months ago where we just sent out a Teams link to the ecology responder, the Coast Guard responder, the QI, and to MSRC. And when the MSRC supervisor arrived on site and joined the meeting, he literally walked up and down the dock showing us the oil that was in the water, and we basically formed a unified command over Teams. The response never got any bigger than that. Right? We put out some boom, we put out some sorbent pads, we kept that meeting open for about 6 hours. People kind of came and went from it, but that was the command post. From a staffing perspective from WSMC, we never went beyond an incident commander, but it worked great because it's so available on your phone or on your tablet, or you should be prepared to have that software in those apps installed, know how to use them.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a really good lessons learned that when you're setting up all your channels or your tables, they need very specific things. And one of those is always make sure there's a calendar at the top. And for each of the sections and for the JIC and for the liaison, that they have that calendar available to them to schedule their meetings. But one of the big things that we mandated is you need to have one computer at that table constantly in an open meeting, constantly the entire time, because as people are moving around, they want to go to that central location. So you will see on your virtual incident command post on the left which of the tables have an ongoing meeting right then. And you can be in 5 or 6 meetings simultaneously. It'll show that you're on hold if you're in one in particular. But you can then jump to the other meeting that you were trying to follow and jump to the other one. It also helps to find people, because the teams will show you who's in each meeting. But I think the most critical thing that we learned is that from the start to the end, one computer needed to be hosting a meeting the entire time. But that schedule would be up saying, okay, don't be in this room during that time. Move over to this other meeting. So it's sub meetings within each table to say, hey, we're going to go over here and we're going to have a briefing on XYZ. But the main room is open should somebody pop in there. And again, you do need that monitor to watch and answer any questions.
So, Mark, are you using the calendar in place of the ICS 230 meeting schedule?
I think that's a good record, but when you are physically in, say you're in the operations channel, they have their own calendar. And so that will allow any of the team members to schedule the meeting there, and it'll be visible to everybody else that's a member of the Microsoft Teams community that you are running.
Interesting. Howard?
I was just going to highlight, drill and exercise lasts for a day, 2, but in a real response, just consider the complexity of managing the digital world, the access. You're going to have people that work. Maybe I worked on the response for a few days, and I want to continue to monitor it. I want to continue to see what's working, and when I go back in a week, I can stay up to date with what's going on. But the flip side of that is you really don't want the wrong people coming into your meetings, or looky-loos, or that link getting out to the wrong people, or there's sort of a security and management aspect to the digital world now that I think should be considered on long duration responses.
I would agree.
It's hard to play that in an exercise.
Even in drills and exercises,
we definitely see it in real responses.
Yeah. There's another feature that you can't see unless you are the one that built it or you're on the short list, which are locked rooms in Microsoft channels where, if you create it, you see all the little padlocks. But if I let, the forestry ranger who showed up to our exercise, because this actually happened, I didn't know this person yet. I said, all right, well, first we're going to vet you. We're going to find out who you are and do a little research. But it was the official government email address and that sort of thing. But that person could not go to the unified command meeting room. They could not go to the PIO or the liaison or to the legal private meeting room. When there was a unified command meeting, that's in open air, that would be visible because that's not in that locked room. So it's as if you literally grab somebody and go out on a smoke break, have the conversation, and come back inside. I think those are very valuable channels to have, especially when it's a drill or an exercise, because we had so many observers. We had over 300 observers from across the industry, just for Crowley, I think we had 200 of them were ours. Just people that needed to understand what our process was. But locking a couple rooms down and being able to do it on the fly. The PIO was having a great conversation. They were having their meeting, but people started asking questions during their meeting. Like, this isn't supposed to be an open meeting. This is us. This is our. We're getting to the JIC. We're trying to form. And so they said, hey, could we have a private room? Within 30 seconds, they had a private room. So you do
Jessica?
run the risk of
No.
running out of potential channels. That's the
I've never-
only warning I'll give.
I haven't used lock channels in that way, at least not for exercises. Jessica, have you?
Yeah, we've done lock channels for UC, and then we have a separate UC channel that's open. So they have one for kind of closed door conversations, and then one for them to facilitate conversation with command and general staff. We have often had a lock channel for PIO and legal and liaison, as well as a lock channel for SimCell or truth. That way, for exercise play, your controllers have all of the kind of truth documentation that they need, all the control elements in a lock channel where no one can access those files. They can have communications, the controllers and evaluators can talk about what they're seeing and have those discussions to run the exercise without the players being able to access that information.
Howard?
I would throw into the consideration for tribes. Over a few drills, we've noted that tribes really want their own space, room to speak freely, where others aren't. I think that's something to consider with the platforms.
That's a really good point. So, Jessica, I hope you're taking all these notes. I'm expecting to be able to get a hold of your manual that I assume you're writing, the Virtual Command Post manual.
I would love to compile all of the things that we've learned and we've learned from talking to other people about this.
Mm-hmm.
We need a white paper or something.
It's a novel.
What's
Yeah,
that?
It's a novel. It's just not a paper.
Yeah.
Roger that. Well, that's about all the time we have for this today. But around the room, maybe one last thought that you might have that really stands out for you, things we should think about as we continue to use these hybrid environments. And I'll just start in the upper left-hand corner. Mark.
Training. But the bigger one is every time you think that you've done everything right with your Microsoft Teams, Microsoft updates Teams. So the buttons that are on your training video are no longer where they were last week. And that happened all the time during the pandemic. We'd do screenshots and we would make really cool PDFs to send out. And then we'd show up to do the actual training and the buttons are nowhere near where they used to be. So as much as we do training, we always throw in the caveat that it will adjust. Just be patient. You'll find the button eventually.
Yeah,
and I still don't know why they put the share button right next to the exit button. That is a error-ridden environment.
Howard, your thoughts?
I mean, I would just say that one thing I like about this community is the sharing and the talking. And I know that the contractors talk and the plan holders talk and the agencies talk. And just in a few short years, we've really honed in on a bunch of lessons learned. And it's nice to know that we can get, the rocket ship off the ground if we have to. And I would say just keep the momentum going. And, I think virtual aspects are here to stay, and we'll keep learning and sharing and building on it.
I agree completely. Russ?
I think preparation, especially if you're building the virtual command post or you're going to be hosting with clients, preparation and thinking through the process and who needs to use what. And so we can pre-set up either tabs or automate functions or even tell somebody how to do a meeting real quick and have somebody be that producer. So the whole production of a virtual command post or a hybrid command post is vital to just preparation and knowing who's coming, knowing what their expectations are, and then going back to Mark's point, knowing where the current buttons are, because you can have an exercise or a drill or a real world event at one facility 1 year, and the next year things are going to be completely different, and you have to walk everybody through where to find things for that particular event. And so it goes back to preparation, goes back to training, and making sure that everybody knows the ICS process in the first place so they can work their way through the virtual command post.
Well, that's a really good point. And even when you think you're looking at the right buttons, making sure that you've checked it out in the Mac version, in the Windows version, in the web browser, because they can be slightly different. If all your training videos and PDFs are done in one version, it might not carry over to something else. Jessica, you're our producer of this episode. You're the brains behind this mission. What are your last thoughts?
I mean, I would echo what everyone else says, but I would add to that the importance of making sure that you have the right people in the right roles. And, this is something that Unified Command does in their initial IC meeting to talk about how do we need to staff our organization. Now that conversation needs to incorporate the discussion about who do we need to facilitate this virtual integration. So taking a look, if you're trying to decide which functions you need to activate for your response, do you need counterparts to integrate virtual? Do you need people with certain qualifications or certain skills? It's not quite the same as having someone who's got qualifications to be a Type 1 planning section chief, but do you have someone who's tech savvy, who can be your meeting producer, who knows how to share their screen and work a OWL meeting camera and move files around in Teams and invite people and mute the microphone? All of that is a very specific skill set, but talking about which additional kind of technical specialists or subject matter experts do we need to bring in to make sure that this runs smoothly? Do we need to staff extra people in situation or documentation to facilitate the virtual integration piece? So I think having the right people in the right jobs is part of preparation. It's part of the response. And that follows through even to the recovery period when you're scaling down. Maybe don't scale down all your documentation people yet. Make sure that someone's there to close out your virtual command post. Make sure that they kick people out of the command post and finalize all those documents. That's just another part of the process, and just making sure you have the right qualified people to do that. When you do everything digitally, like Mark said, if you accidentally click leave meeting instead of share screen, that same thing can happen when you start deleting files or editing files that you think are final approved version. So if you don't have someone who's qualified to do that job, it's just going to bring about even more headaches.
Well, that's a really good point. In my closing thoughts are 2 points. One, digital first. You really have to focus on the remote participants. And then my last thought is a tip or trick that occurs to me I haven't shared yet, because you can only have one window open at a time in Teams. But in a web browser, you can have as many open as you want. So what I do is I launch Chrome and I open multiple tabs in the web browser, and I log into Teams over and over and over again, and I set up a tab for each of the channels that I'm trying to monitor. And that way you can get a much broader look at what's going on. So I think that is a pretty cool thing. That's it. That's all the time we have for the tactics meeting. I'm going to add some save the dates before we go. Everybody should know about. We're doing an ICS 300 class at the Clean Rivers facility, June 27th, 28th, and 29th. And you can register at cleanriverscooperative.com. We're also doing a 400 class on June 30th. So if you've had the 300 class, we're going to give a one-day 400 class as well. We're also producing our own conference at the end of August, the Tactics Conference, August 31st. It will be recorded and broadcast from the Clean Rivers facility. It will be virtual participants on Zoom. We're going to have 6 different sessions. Mark Curtis is helping to chair our planning committee. So block out August 31st. Join us for the Tactics Conference. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you the next time. Now, everyone get back to work. Now I have to finish how I stop my recording. There it is.